Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Let's begin. She walked blindly through the rain that seemed to be pelting her harder than anyone else around her. The young teen didn't even bother with an umbrella, as she was already used to such treatment from Mother Nature. She sighed, wiping her eyes with her wet sleeve. I know I'm unlucky, but seriously, the forecast said it was going to be sunny all day. Well, my shoe did fall upside down this morning, she thought to herself. Look out, it's Yoshino. If you go near her you'll get cursed, cried a mocking voice. An irk mark found itself placed on the back of the girl's head. Normally, she would just let it go. She was not good at confronting people. In fact, it was her least favorite thing to do. However, her time as a middle schooler was soon coming to an end. Plus, once she got home, there were much bigger fish to fry. Steeling herself, she inhaled and turned back to smile at the bully. Actually, about that, Yoshino, I'm feeling extra lucky today. The bully, now identified as Yoshino, found himself stepping back at this comment. Usually that was a bad thing in regards to this girl. Hey now, it was just a joke, let's not get crazy here. Yoshino laughed nervously as he held his hands up in surrender. Yoshino's eyes shaded over slightly as she smiled. If I can't stand up here I may as well forget my plans. She walked over to the young man and slapped her hand down on his shoulder. I think I'll share some of my fortune with you. May it follow you all the way home. Yoshino's face turned blue, as at that very second, a car drove by and splashed them both with a mountain of dirty water. He spit and hacked out what got into his mouth, while Nanami seemed virtually unfazed by the event as she let her hand drop. Disgusting, I'm gonna get you for this, Nanami. Nanami drowned out his voice as she walked towards her home, satisfaction written over her face. Her heart was pounding a mile a minute. Though, considering this was the first time she did something like this, it may be a good idea to run in case Yoshino decided to retaliate. So she did. She ran for a good 10 minutes before realizing he wasn't following her. Sighing in relief, she continued her post-school ritual. Hopping over a crack in the sidewalk and petting the neighbor's black cat, Kuro, Nanami was positive the rest of the day would be fine. Absolutely positive. And then she fell in front of her doorstep. OWW, so close, she sat up, rubbing her nose as the door opened in front of her. She was greeted wordlessly by her father's tired smile. She looked down at herself in her sorry state, and smiled hesitantly. If it helps, I totally almost made it here unscathed up until now. Her father laughed and held a hand out to her, which she gratefully took. Really now? That must be a new record for you. He patted her head affectionately and looked out the door. Look at that. The rain stopped as soon as you came in. He half joked. Nanami puffed out her cheek in dismay at her father's words. He laughed nervously upon seeing his joke miss. Go take a bath before you catch a cold. Also, why is your hair all dirty? You look like a schmuck. Deciding not to tell her father of her earlier interaction with Yoshino, Nanami went upstairs to freshen up. Nanami smiled at her now clean, ash blonde hair. Wiping her face with a dry cloth, she admired her freckles and the overall lack of damage to said face. Honestly, she considered today to be successful due to the lack of injuries. Glancing around her room, she spotted the application tucked safely under her pillow, out of the sight of her black cat, laying not too far away. Her brown eyes lit up in delight. He hadn't torn it up. She nodded excitedly to herself in the mirror. That's a good sign. All right then, she took the sheet of paper and carefully walked down the stairs. Not even waiting to reach the bottom, where her parents were waiting, she began her pitch. Okay, so you know how you guys asked me what high school I wanted to go to. She excitedly slid down the rails of the steps, landing on her feet. Another good sign. Her mother, a lighter blonde version of herself, glanced at her excited daughter in surprise and slight worry from her wheelchair. She looked at her husband, who was busy in the kitchen before returning her attention to Nanami. Have you already made your choice? There's still time, you know. Nanami ran into the dining room and held the paper behind her back. I've already decided. I want to be a hero, and the only way to do that is to go to a hero school. Her father tensed, but she missed it, focusing on her mother's concerned expression. Nanami bit her lip. The school I want to go to is Her father walked into the room, wiping his hands with a cloth, a frown planted on his face. Oh, she thought. Why are they looking at me like that? Her heartbeat began to increase, loudly thumping her chest. I haven't said it yet, or do they already know? Does this mean I can't go? She looked down at her shoes, beads of sweat trickling down her neck. I stood up to a bully today. Heroes do that. I can be a hero. The first step is to speak. She peeked through her uneven bangs. Her parents could sense her anxiety, and attempted to wear more neutral expressions. It didn't help. Nanami took a breath in, and out again. I want to go to UA. She held out her application, which was already filled out and ready to send. Her mother pursed her lips together, and looked at her brunette husband. He sighed and rubbed his neat and tidy hair. Well, do you think you could get in with your quirk? He asked. It's not exactly conventional for a hero. His words were careful. He glanced at his wife, wondering if he was wording it right. While he didn't want to discourage his only child, he also didn't want her to have false hope. She glanced at him and nodded in approval. Nanami looked at her application before nodding. I know my quirk is weird, especially since it's nothing like either of yours, and it has a lot of setbacks. But, she swallowed a dry lump in her throat. I've been practicing on how to use those setbacks to my advantage. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. I want to try at least. If I don't make it, I'll go to a normal school, so it's not like I don't have a backup plan. Once again she peeked through her bangs. Sakura, she's doing the face, her father whispered weakly, staring at his daughter's sad round eyes. Sakura sighed heavily. You've always been a good kid, you don't ask for much, do you? Nanami shook her head sideways. Sakura rolled up to Nanami, and looked into her daughter's eyes. The house was quiet for several seconds. Dropping her head in defeat, Sakura smiled. Alrighty then, if you think you can get into that high school, then I say go for it. She turned her chair to look at her husband. Hajime, any objections? Her husband simply shook his head. She rolled to face her daughter again. Well, there you have it. Her eyes widened at the sight of tears in her child's eyes. Oh sweetie, don't cry, it's okay. We said you can apply. Nanami shook her head, before wiping her eyes. It's not that, your wheel is on my foot, she managed to squeak out. Oh shoot. I'm sorry. Her mother quickly rolled backwards. Nanami smiled weakly, dropping her application in order to nurse her now throbbing foot. The paper slowly floated down, before harmlessly landing underneath the coffee table. There it read. Name: Yoshino Nanami. Quirk: Misfortune. Nanami hummed in content as she doodled in class. It was nearing the end of the school term and she would soon be saying goodbye to Aldera Junior High. Trying to be as invisible as possible, she was trying to figure out what she wanted her hero costume to look like. Her teacher, a woman running close to the elderly side, was passing out career papers. As luck would have it, she caught the young blonde drawing instead of listening and, as a result, had her stand in the hall. Nanami shook her head, sighing at her misfortune. I don't know if that was my quirk, or if she's just perceptive, she mumbled to herself. She looked at her doodle. It was simple so far, with various good luck charms on it. She frowned and began to think to herself how that may have actually been the wrong idea. If I'm supposed to use my quirk to pass my bad luck onto my enemies, maybe I should actually get bad luck charms, but then again, if I have too much bad luck then it would hinder me, wouldn't it? It was safe to say she was conflicted. Sighing, she found herself wishing once again that she had one of her parents' quirks. Mom's quirk is really useful. Making plants move and grow on command. I can only imagine all the things I could do with that power, and if I had Dad's super hearing, I'd be pretty useful as an evacuation hero. Well, I guess Mom using her quirk in the garden instead is pretty useful. I think I've seen her make paint for art commissions with her plants. And Dad likes his police job, so who am I to complain? She thought to herself. The doctor had called her quirk a mutation, when a quirk appears out of nowhere, having no relation to the known quirks of the family. It had appeared when she was in kindergarten. Any school supplies she had touched had magically stopped working, or water fountains would suddenly go crazy and spray her in the face. It took quite a while for Nanami and her family to realize this was a quirk situation. Before she knew it, the final bell had rung. Nanami went inside to collect her bag. The teacher asked why she didn't come in when she was called, to which Nanami responded. A loud boy was making explosions in his hands when he walked by and I couldn't hear anything over his yelling. Of course, the teacher would call her when it was too loud to hear her. Nanami sighed and apologized, bowing unnecessarily deeply and leaving into the crowded halls. Nanami quietly shuffled through the flood of students making their way to their shoe lockers. She walked by the closed door of a classroom where she heard a few students who seemed to be in the middle of an altercation. Normally the timid blonde would quietly skulk by, but she found herself stopping at the sound of a familiarly rude voice. You know, if you really want to be a hero, there may actually be a way. Pray that you'll be reborn with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the school. Her eyes widened as she heard the sounds of explosions, followed by, something wrong? Nanami bit her lip, trembling before turning to face the door and swinging it open harshly, unexpectedly coming face to face with the bully. This surprised the four boys in the room, as the similarly hair-colored boy suddenly turned his red eyes to her. Her head barely went past his chest, causing her to have to look up at him. She steeled herself and glared at him, her hand behind her back to hide her trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The boy scoffed. You got something to say, Freckles? He taunted. Nanami's gaze fell to the floor in shame as she stepped to the side. No, nothing, I just came to speak with that boy over there. She glanced at the green-haired boy who looked to be on the verge of tears. With Deku, huh? The blonde boy looked her over, before scoffing. Whatever, have fun. She mumbled a quiet, sure, as he walked away. He paused and looked over his shoulder. I meant what I said, Deku. Don't even think about applying to UA or else. He and his friends continued to walk out. That triggered something in Nanami. Scowling, she whipped around and quickly ran after him, with Deku calling out to her, and brought her hand back. This jerk, who does he think he is, talking to that boy like that, telling him to end his life over something like that? She thought angrily. With a resounding smack, Nanami slapped her hand onto his back as hard as she could. The boy stumbled forward slightly, before straightening out and glaring at her, a noticeable crackling noise coming from his palm. His friends frowned, sensing his rage boiling over, and took a few steps back. Did you just fucking hit me? He growled. Nanami looked at her hand, realizing what she had done. Cursing herself mentally, she frantically looked for an excuse. Bug, the boy glared at her, his crackling hand quickly turning into mini explosions. There was a bug on your back, I got it before it could bite you because he definitely didn't look like he believed her as he stepped towards her. Quickly she blurted out, because I thought you were cute. She covered her mouth, blushing bright red and wide-eyed. The boy stopped in his tracks and frowned in what appeared to be confusion as he lowered his hand. What? His friends began to tease him, causing his cheeks to dust a shade of pink as he barked at them. Shut the fuck up you losers. I swear I'll kill you. Nanami flinched back. He looked at her again, watching as her brown eyes avoided his gaze. He looked away and turned around. Whatever, this isn't worth my time, let's go. Stealing one last glance, he walked away angrily shouting at his friends. Nanami's legs felt weak as she watched him go. Sighing quietly as the worst of the terrifying event was over, she turned around to see the green-haired boy was gone. Remembering the harsh words that were thrown at him, she quickly ran to find him. Out of paranoia, Nanami went to the roof first. It was empty. Cautiously, she walked towards the edge, checking on all sides for a fallen body. She sighed in relief when she spotted Deku, walking around in search of something. She smiled a little before hurrying down, hoping to catch up with him. Quickly changing into her outdoor shoes, she ran out to join him. She found him in front of the koi pond, angrily staring at what looked to be a notebook. A charred one at that. Hesitating, she tapped on his shoulder, being sure not to activate her quirk on accident. This boy seemed unlucky enough. Excuse me, Deku-kun. Did that boy do that? Deku whipped back angrily. That's not my name. Nanami squeaked and recoiled in surprise. His eyes widened in recognition and held a hand out, waving it as if to fan away her fear. I'm sorry. Sorry, my name isn't Deku, it's what Kachan calls me to make fun of me. My name is Midoriya Izuku, he quietly corrected. Assuming Kachan was a nickname for his bully, she nodded once. Am I Midoriya-kun? She tilted her head in concern. Are you okay? That boy said some mean things to you. Her head was tilted down as she spoke to him. Midoriya tilted his head in confusion, finding that the action reminded him of a baby deer. He looked at his soaked notebook and felt his shoulders sag. Letting out a long sigh, he looked at Nanami and nodded. I'm alright, I guess. He's such a jerk. Just because I'm quirkless he thinks he can treat me like garbage. He began to walk away. Then again, me being so spineless doesn't help. Nanami frowned and considered following the boy. Are you still going to apply to UA? She asked cautiously. Midoriya stopped and hesitated, before nodding. Well, I think I understand how you feel, just a little. Midoriya turned back to look at her in confusion. You're quirkless too? Nanami tensed before shaking her head. She saw his disappointment and quickly backpedaled. My quirk is called misfortune. I bring bad luck wherever I go, sometimes I can pass it on to others. I want to be a hero and go to UA too, and my parents said I can, but sometimes I worry that my quirk isn't suited for a hero, like, what if I was saving someone and all of a sudden the floor collapses, or something? That's happened to me before when my family went to an old inn. She found herself trailing off. Midoriya's hand itched as he looked towards his notebook, desperately wanting to write down such intriguing information. I didn't know a quirk like that existed. Nanami vaguely heard him muttering as he seemed to ponder what he was told. I think it could be useful, if you passed bad luck onto a villain, it would be good luck for your allies, though I guess it could still be difficult since you'd still be affected. Nanami found herself smiling at the boy's consideration. That's a nice thought, but regardless, I don't think you should give up on going to UA. I heard they got rid of the rule saying you need a quirk to get in, so I'm sure there's still hope. She hesitated, realizing she was butting into his business and he possibly didn't want her pity. I'm sorry, I should probably mind my own business. Besides, I don't want to pass any bad luck to you, so see you later? She said meekly. Midoriya smiled a little, finding his spirits slightly uplifted. Sure, but, your name. Nanami flinched in realization. She hadn't even told him her name and she was butting into his business. She bowed politely. My name is Yoshino Nanami. It's nice to meet you. She hesitated and pulled out her phone. It was a flip phone, for the simple fact that all her smartphones kept breaking and she needed something sturdier. Do you want to exchange numbers? She asked. Midoriya stared at her in surprise. Both teens had found themselves blushing at her inquiry. Nanami closed her eyes, holding the phone in front of her face as if it could hide her embarrassment. In case you feel like talking, or you're having a bad day. And not that I think you always get into bad situations or something. In her head, Nanami was willing herself to stop talking. Midoriya looked at her phone. What a nice person, does this make her my friend now? He got out his phone and nodded a little. Why yes, I'd like to exchange numbers, please? Nanami smiled brightly in relief and exchanged numbers with the frazzled boy. They waved goodbye to each other and parted ways. Nanami felt lighter. She actually managed to help someone. It was a step in the right direction. Bakugo grunted as he stepped in a puddle. Gross, he growled as he ran his hand through his spiky hair. He recalled the freckled girl with the doe eyes. He felt his cheeks heat up. She thinks I'm cute? What kind of bullshit is that? So stupid, he thought as he finished off his can of soda. Hey Katsuki, you still thinking about that girl from earlier? His long-fingered friend asked in a mocking tone. Bakugo scowled and glared back at him. Don't go talking bullshit, of course not. His other companion chuckled. Whatever, anyway, aren't you and Midoriya childhood friends? Don't you think you went a little overboard today? Katsuki stopped, scowling. It's his fault for getting in my way. He found himself recalling the boy in question's words from earlier. I may not have a quirk, but I can still try my best, can't I? He growled in annoyance. Someone needs to teach that nerd how the world works. Crushing and exploding the can in his hand, he tossed it to the side. I hate when he talks about heroes, he grumbled lowly. His friends looked to the side, their eyes widening in horror as they pointed behind him. Bakugo turned around and was greeted by a person made completely out of what looked to be sewage water. A skinsuit with a powerful quirk. Am I lucky or what? Nanami hummed as she walked home. Somehow, she hadn't had much bad luck since school had finished. No puddles were stepped in, no dogs tried to chase her, nothing. So far it was a pretty decent day. Maybe I'll buy a snack while I'm here, she muttered to herself gleefully. As she walked through the shopping center, she heard a commotion. She looked around and quickly spotted a large crowd forming at an alleyway. Frowning, she decided it was best to hurry home. She didn't want to test her luck if it was a villain attack. Enjoying some matcha-flavored taiyaki, Nanami walked into her house, pleased that she hadn't dropped the sweet treat like usual. Her father ran up to her as soon as she walked in and hugged her. Oh, there went her taiyaki. Ah, Dad, she sighed in disappointment. Hajime glanced down at the fallen treat before looking at his daughter. Sorry Nanami, I'll get you a new one. Your mother and I are just so relieved you're okay. Nanami frowned in confusion. What do you mean, why wouldn't I be? She asked. Her mother rolled over to them in her wheelchair. There's currently a villain attack in the Tatooine shopping district. A student from your school is being held hostage. You came home later than normal, and with your bad luck, we were scared it was you. Why didn't you answer your phone? She explained and inquired sternly. Nanami looked at her phone and grimaced at seeing that the battery had died. Sorry, it died, I was having such good luck today too. She paused and suddenly tensed up. Wait, from my school? She asked. Sakura frowned a little and looked back at the living room. Yes. The news is covering it right now. The heroes aren't having much success though. She sighed and rolled back into the living room. Hey, there's the student. Oh my, it's a young boy, she exclaimed. Hajime quickly ran over to see. Nanami found herself trembling. A boy from her school, it couldn't be one of the boys she interacted with earlier, could it? She's almost positive she didn't use her quirk on either of them, so it couldn't be, right? She shakily walked up to the couch and sat down next to her father. The camera once again focused on the boy's face. Her blood ran cold. It was him. The bully from earlier. He was almost entirely engulfed in a sludge monster's body. It didn't look like he could breathe as it covered his mouth and nose. Keiko-chan, she whispered. Suddenly, she remembered when she slapped him on the back and recalled all her sudden good luck. Oh no. And then suddenly, on the screen, a familiar head of curly green hair ran out into the fray. She nearly had a heart attack at the sight of Midoriya running in to save his friend. Her eyes widened in horror, hands flying to her mouth as she recalled when she tapped him on the shoulder and spoke to him for a long time. Oh my god, this is all my fault. She leaned forward, clasping her hands together and closing her eyes tightly. Please, please save them. Anyone, please, she prayed mentally. Detrawat. SMAAASSH. She released the breath she didn't know she was holding at the sight of All Might, the #1 hero. Holding back tears, she closed her eyes, falling back on the couch, and letting her head hang on the back. Her parents looked at her in concern, but she ignored them as she reflected. I thought I had better control over my quirk on other people. I need to apologize the next time I see them. Nanami went to bed early that night. Hajime hummed as he was carrying a tray of pancakes and fresh fruit towards his daughter's room. Nanami had shut herself in throughout the entire weekend since the incident regarding her two schoolmates. Despite his best efforts, he was unsuccessful in convincing his precious girl that the incident wasn't her fault. So breakfast in bed appeared to be his last option. He knocked on the door, and softly called for his daughter. Nanami? I've brought you breakfast, can I come in? He could hear Nanami shuffling in bed, a quiet, I'm not hungry, Dad, following shortly after. It's chocolate chip pancakes with fresh berries and whipped cream, he countered with a small smile. There was a short silence, followed by the sound of footsteps. Nanami opened the door and peeked her head out suspiciously. Her father chuckled and patted her head, walking in while balancing the tray on his arm. He looked around his daughter's room, familiarizing himself with any new good luck charms she had acquired. Well, at least it was tidy. Are you still upset by what happened with those boys? In the end they were alright, it's really okay. Besides, there's no proof that this happened because of your quirk, he said tenderly. He watched the lack of reaction in Nanami as she proceeded to eat her pancakes. She set her fork down after a couple bites and looked back at her father with crestfallen eyes. Just like there's no proof that this didn't happen because of my quirk. Nanami sighed and placed her tray beside her. Resting her hands behind her, she leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Can I really be a hero, Dad? I mean, let's say it wasn't my fault. I walked past the scene. I keep thinking over and over, if I had stayed, what could I have done to help? It's haunting me. Because every time I imagine myself going against that sludge monster thing, I can't see how I'd be any help at all, just how my bad luck could make it worse. Hajime puckered his lips in thought. He closed his eyes and found himself also thinking how his daughter could have been an asset to the situation. Furrowing his eyebrows, he struggled to see ways in which her misfortune could help. He could see her running forward like the green-haired boy, only to trip over something and end up in the villain's clutches. Beads of sweat appeared on his head as he imagined Nanami throwing something at the villain only for it to ricochet back at her and again end with her in the villain's grasp. Nanami frowned as she saw her father's expressions change several times. Shaking her head, she stood up, catching his attention. Taking a deep breath in, she slapped her hands to her cheeks. Right. She clenched her fists and looked at her father. Dad, I've decided how I'll apologize to those boys. She declared. Her father opened his mouth only for her to cut him off. No matter how you spin it, those boys were unlucky. So I'm going to apologize by being a better hero. She clenched her fist and stared at it. Right, Midoriya-kun is quirkless, and he won't give up. I'll meet him at UA, and I'm sure that Kachangai will be there too. She looked up and turned to face her father. I'll meet them at UA, and I'll get on my hands and knees and beg for forgiveness after I hone my quirk so this never happens again. Hajime blinked at the sudden mood swing, but nevertheless he smiled proudly at his daughter's enthusiasm. Standing up, he put his hands on Nanami's shoulders. Right. I'll help you in any way I can, Nanami. Now what's the first step? He asked excitedly. Nanami whipped out her phone and selected Midoriya's number. First I'm going to text Midoriya-kun some words of encouragement, she announced. Her father nodded in agreement. She glared at her phone with determination and lifted her thumbs. Nanami? Hajime asked softly. Sweetie, why are you shaking so much? Nanami was practically vibrating as she turned around to face her father with rather comical tears, having not typed a single character. Dad, I've never texted a boy before, what do I say? Midoriya grunted as he pulled an old tire across the sand. All Might had chosen him as his successor, and he was to do some hardcore community service as his training. Honestly, it was really tiring when half the junk on the shore weighed as much, if not more than, him. Suddenly his back pocket pinged, and he stopped just for a second to look at his phone. His eyes widened. A text from Yoshino-san. Glancing around to check if his mentor was watching, he opened the message. Midoriya-kun, how are you? I saw what happened on the news a couple of days ago. You were really cool when you tried to save that boy. I know you'll be a great hero and that's why I'm not giving up either. I'll definitely see you at UA. It's a promise, okay? Yoshino Nanami, with a big smiley emoji at the end. Midoriya's cheeks burned slightly in appreciation. A promise. He looked at the tire and the surrounding filth blanketing the beach. Looking at his phone he quickly responded, I'll see you there, and hit send. Filled with newly found determination, Midoriya grabbed the tire and pulled it vigorously. Toshinori watched from the distance, a curious smile planted on his face. Well, he seems more motivated all of a sudden. His sweat dropped upon seeing the young boy fall over from pulling. I wonder if he realizes he'd have an easier time if he just rolled it. Small Might quickly jogged over to the boy to make sure he was uninjured. Nanami sat at her bed as she stared at the text she had sent to Midoriya. She found herself sweating at the sheer audacity of the message. She had written it out after 23 minutes of stressing, and had only sent it after getting approval from both parents. Her dad had insisted on making it more energetic as her first draft had simply said, Let's do our best to get into you a Midoriya-kun. Her mother didn't see an issue with it, but her father insisted adding more would get her feelings across more clearly. Though, looking back at the message log, she couldn't help but worry she had put her foot in her mouth. I'll definitely see you at UA. Why did I say that? With my luck I might not get in because I said that, then he'll think I'm a liar. She groaned out loud. Looking at her phone again she pouted. Maybe I could erase it before he sees. Yeah, I'll do that. She moved over to the options button, and was about to hit the option to delete the message, only for her to realize that the message had been read at that exact moment. Nanami groaned again and held her head in her hands. When her phone pinged, she squealed and threw it at the edge of her bed, startling her cat that had been relaxing on the corner. Oh gosh, I'm sorry Mio. She crawled over to the edge of her bed and pet her cat apologetically. After settling the fluffy creature down, she sat back down. Glancing at her phone, she cautiously picked it up and read the message. I'll see you there. Nanami pursed her lips together in conflict. Shaking her head she sighed and laid down. Well, now there's no turning back. She groaned again. It had been several weeks since Nanami began training for the entrance exam in a couple of months. Her curly hair was held up in two wild pigtails as she jogged in the park at 5 a.m. If what she heard was right, the entrance exam was very physically demanding. My quirk might not be enough to get me in. I have to train my body as well, she thought tiredly. She could see her breath as she jogged in the chilly early morning. She wore the lightest jacket she had, hoping to increase her adrenaline and tolerance to the cold. She fought the urge to sneeze as she ran, rubbing her nose before huffing and beginning to punch the air. Her punches didn't seem to have much force behind them as she had limited upper body strength, but she planned on increasing that. That being said, she didn't expect to round the corner and her tiny fists connected a solid blow to something firm. She stumbled back slightly and shook her hand in pain. Ow, I'm sorry, are you alright? She asked, looking up to properly apologize to her victim. Her face turned blue as her brown eyes met angry red eyes. Eek, she took several steps back. Keikachan, she exclaimed. Bakugo dusted his sleeve as he looked at her, narrowing his eyes. Nanami noted his comfy-looking jacket in envy. It looked so warm in comparison to her thin sweater. Finally, he spoke. Who the hell are you calling Kachan? And what's the big idea hitting me like that? He growled in annoyance. He took a few steps towards her. Nanami held her arm out straight as she backed up defensively. I'm sorry, that's the only name I know you by. She tried to explain. And I didn't see you there. I would never just hit someone I don't know. Bakugo raised an eyebrow in recognition. A smirk crossed his lips at her last sentence. Well, if that ain't the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. If I recall, you hit me the first day you met me, he scoffed in half amusement, half annoyance. Nanami's eyes lit up, remembering the incident when she slapped his back and her pathetic excuse of a lie that day. She hesitated, shuffling under the taller boy's blank stare. What are you doing out so early? She squeaked out. That was a stupid question. Convenience store run. What are you doing out so early, Freckles? He retorted snidely, holding a full bag up for emphasis. Nanami wasn't expecting a straight answer. Biting her lip in thought, she found herself wincing as it had dried due to the cold. She licked her lip once before answering, I'm training, I want to be fit for the entrance exam for UA, since I don't have a power that would make things easy, so I started jogging before school, shoot, she was shivering. The cocky blonde in front of her was sure to confuse her actions for fear of him. Never let a bully know you're afraid, look him in the eye, Nanami. Stop trembling, stop, she scolded herself mentally. Bakugo did a once-over of the tiny girl. His smirk fell and he found himself irritated at her sorry state. What the hell are you wearing out in this weather? And why the hell is your hair up in those stupid pigtails, aren't you freezing? He demanded, seeming more angry than concerned. His hand popped with the familiar sound of tiny explosions as if to further emphasize his fury. Nanami's tense shoulders sagged in surprise at the scolding she received. She looked at her thin jacket and shrugged lightly. I read somewhere that training in the sea cold H helps with burning calories and building muscle. She sneezed and sniffled. Thinking back on it, I guess that's a dumb idea. Bakugo rolled his eyes. No shit, it's a dumb idea. What, did you get that idea out of a magazine? He asked mockingly. There was a moment of silence between both blondes. Apparently, that was exactly what happened. Bakugo's small explosions popped again. Are you an idiot? Holy shit, and you're trying to be a hero, he raged. Nanami shrunk into her sweater and looked down. I could ask you the same thing, she mumbled to herself. Thankfully Bakugo didn't seem to hear her. I know it was stupid, alright. Now excuse me, I need to go home and warm up, I guess, she sighed, clearly feeling discouraged by her lack of common sense. Bakugo watched the freckled girl head towards the park exit. His eyes narrowed at the sight of her trembling worsening. Growling and running his hand through his hair, he walked up to Nanami and grabbed onto her shoulder, roughly jerking her back. Nanami yelped in surprise as Bakugo pulled on her. Whipping around, she pushed his hand off her shoulder. Don't touch me, she exclaimed. Bakugo raised an eyebrow, looking at his hand then back at her. So you can yell. What a surprise. He reached his hand out again and she took a visible step back. What the hell is your problem now? He watched her posture, she was tucked into herself, her head tilted down. Honestly, he couldn't tell if she was scared or freezing anymore. Look, I ain't a pervert or anything. Smirking slightly, he stepped forward. Even if I was, you think I'm cute so it doesn't matter, he mocked half-heartedly. Nanami felt her cheeks heat up at the embarrassing memory. She huffed and pulled her hair from its pigtails. If you touch me you'll get her. She sneezed. It's really cold, she really regretted wearing this thin sweater. Bakugo felt an irk mark appear on the back of his head. You're seriously pissing me off, you can't even talk. He took off his jacket and threw it at her, watching with satisfaction as it landed on her head. What kind of hero are you? Get out of here before I kill you. Nanami relaxed at the intense body heat trapped in the oversized jacket. She pulled it off her head. Won't you get cold? She asked quietly, feeling her trembling lessen as she wrapped herself in the jacket. Shut up, I'm going straight home. Unlike you, I'm not dumb enough to spend a long time in the cold. He scoffed, seemingly offended at the audacity of her question. Quit calling me dumb, you jerk, Nanami thought in irritation. Though she of course would not voice her thoughts to him. She closed her eyes and bowed to him respectfully. Thank you. She looked up at him, her freckled cheeks and nose red from the cold.
Bakugo averted his gaze. I'll bring this back.
Bakugo turned around. Whatever, you do that, I don't really care.
He began to walk away, heating his hands up with his quirk. He looked back and saw that the freckled girl hadn't moved from the spot. His eye twitched and he lit up his hand. Hey, Freckles, don't apply to UA. A quirkless loser like you is gonna get killed at the entrance exam, just like Deku. He exclaimed. He watched her expression change into one of confusion. Nodding once, mostly to himself, he walked away towards his apartment.
Nanami tilted her head. Quirkless, she zipped up his jacket around her and began walking home. I didn't say I was quirkless, did I? She looked at the sky, before blinking, a strong smell catching her attention. She looked around before looking down at Kachan's jacket. She lifted her arm and smelled the sleeve. It smells like a fireplace. She smiled a little and kept walking, carefully avoiding any cracks in the sidewalk.